Welcome to part 2 of a very interesting conversation with Krish Ashok, and this is Cook Bytes, where we talk anything and everything food.
But I do want to hear some outrageous claims that you've heard on the internet. And either you've spoken about it or you haven't spoken about it yet. Either of them is fine.
Yeah.
But I really want to hear some outrageous ones that you've come across.
So I think there's just so many. It's very, very hard to even, it's one of those
Top
things.
three then.
Top, very, very hard. So one is you must only drink water standing up, I think, is or sitting down, one of those things, right? Yeah, you must only drink
Yes.
water. Sitting down is one thing. And second thing, obviously, is this idea that if you eat meat, right, the tension and the stress that the animal undergoes during the slaughter, that all of those characteristics you also get apparently.
So it's like a karmic balance of sorts.
Karmic balance, right? I mean, yes, when you cut an onion, we now know all the other things the onion does to protect itself, right?
Yes.
So, but apparently it doesn't apply there, but it does apply to eating a prawn, right, or eating a crab or a lobster, right? So anyway, so I think that in general, I think a whole ton of content attempting to shame meat eating, I think is one category. And then some completely random things like you must not eat. The third, I think the pervasive one is about, really, this is very strange, right? The idea that if you don't remove that froth when you're cooking dal, you will get joint pain and arthritis. It just simply does not seem to go away, right? And it's really funny. And it's a very specifically a very North Indian thing, because in South India, pressure cookers have been used for much longer time.
Right.
Because one, in India particularly, it's very interesting. Rice-based cultures in India typically were among the earliest to have create the conditions for women to go to school and go to work and all of that.
Right.
Wheat-based cultures, well, we got to make chapatis all day, right? No going to school
Right.
and work and all that. So they took them a longer time to get there. Rice-based cultures, because you can cook one shot for everyone. So,
Yes.
So in that sense, the adoption of things like a pressure cooker much earlier, much more prevalent, right? You would often find that not every household in North India will have a pressure cooker, at least in the smaller town. But everyone in every village will have a pressure cooker in India for cooking, in South India for cooking dal and rice and so on. And we know that you wash dal, you put it, you cook it, and you use it, right? So nobody's sitting and removing all the froth or any of that, right? And if you don't want that froth to damage your pressure cooker, the science you can use is add a little bit of half teaspoon of oil, right? So that will prevent that saponification to mess up your pressure cooker. Otherwise, it's really, and people think it's some anti-nutrient called saponin. No, it's mostly starch and protein, right? So it says people don't ask the obvious next question: how do you know it's all saponins? Right? Did someone do a test? Right? So my favorite category is essentially that something is toxic. I usually tell people, just ask that person, name the toxin. Then we'll talk. Name the toxin. Then we'll talk about, okay, at what dosage is it toxic? So I think, this is, in general, I think every day people come up with new ways in which they can scare people. And so, yeah, there are none of these kinds of examples.
So there's another topic that I actually want to touch on. And that's about food products in general.
Yes.
You did have one of your videos which mentioned the difference between, there is ultra-processed food, of course.
Yes.
And then there's processed food, which consists of most of the things that we actually eat.
Yes. Everything, almost everything we eat other than raw vegetables, etc., other than vegetables.
And that's what makes everyone's diet sustainable to an extent, right?
Not just sustainable, you'd starve otherwise. So, where people think just the amount of effort it takes to first grow rice and then go from what you get from that rice plant to that white rice that you eat.
Yes.
It's insane. The plant didn't make that for you to eat. The plant made that so that it can grow its next generation, right? It puts a ton of anti-nutrients and a very tight husk and all of these things that human ingenuity and machines have made possible for you to process.
Right.
So you think people are sitting and removing every rice grain? No, it's machine. It's been machined for thousands of years, right? Except that it used to be hand or animal powered, and now it's machine powered. It's electricity, right? And so all food is effectively processed. So the question to ask is always, what is the processing doing? Yes, and so you should know, right? So when you process wheat, if you remove the outer husk, which you have to because you can't digest it, only cows can.
Right.
How much of the bran are you removing? Is a question you need to ask, because if you don't remove the bran, the shelf life of that flour is much shorter. right? Because the germ in the bran contains things that will oxidize and it has fat that will go rancid. So just like how brown rice or red rice will very short shelf life. Whereas polished white rice, years, right? In a country of 1.4 billion, you think you can grow rice and feed everyone with brown rice? No way. I mean, you can't store rice and give in your ration shop if it is all brown rice. It will go bad, right? So it has to be white rice. Likewise, most of the wheat flour, unless you make most of it into all-purpose or maida, most of it will go waste, right? Atta has a much shorter shelf life, right? So therefore, I think, people have to ask the question of what is the processing doing? How much fiber is it removing? How much of the micronutrients is it removing, right? And so with rice, that if you polish it, right, and you get the basmati or that kind of rice, that has little or no nutrients other than carbohydrates, right? Whereas we know that all the good stuff in the rice is actually in the bran. So if you parboil it, many of those vitamins and all come into the starchy part. And so that's why idli rice or your parboiled rice is, nowadays people now know that. So most of their day-to-day cooking is actually with parboiled rice. So at least you don't have vitamin B deficiencies and all of that, right? And likewise, people also know that any kind of processing of atta, maida, etc., now they can fortify it. They can fortify with, while it's not quite the same thing as getting it naturally, but it's still better than nothing, right? All refined oils are fortified with all the fat-soluble vitamins, right? Your cold press oils are not, right? How are you absolutely certain you're getting your vitamin A from everywhere else? Fat-soluble vitamins present always a big risk for vegetarians because you're not going to find them in plants.
Right.
Unless there are some plant sources of oils, etc., that may have it, but you may not consume them, right? So, but they're naturally going to get them in milk, you're going to get them in eggs, you're going to get them in many of these other meats and other things that you eat, right? So people, I think in general, you have to ask yourself, what is the processing doing? If the processing is removing micronutrients, then you need to say, yeah, I need to compensate it elsewhere. It's very easy to do. Just eat more vegetables. You'll get all your micronutrients. Vegetables are the single most micronutrient dense things you can eat. Just eat more vegetables, right? Both cooked or uncooked, right? The second thing is that, are you removing fiber? Again, vegetables are a fantastic source of fiber and fruits as well. Just eat more of that, right? You're eating maida parota. You don't necessarily have to eat with something that has no vegetables.
Exactly. Right? That's like saying if you're eating Maggi, you might as well add vegetables in it. Like you're just making it better. Right. That doesn't mean you shouldn't eat that.
I'm not saying eat Maggi daily, but on the odd chance that one, you're a mother and your kid is like asking for Maggi, and you're busy and you have other things to do and the kid is hungry, you don't have time to cook, etc. No harm in making Maggi and then adding a ton of vegetables and saying, I will make Maggi, but you got to eat all the vegetables, right? So it's a good way to force kids to kids will not eat vegetables. Yeah? It's just the way it is, right? It's very hard. My son will not eat anything green in color. He will remove all the green things, but he's now okay with red. So carrot he eats, right? And potato, of course, he will eat. And those are not really vegetables, to be honest. They're just carbohydrate sources, right? Anything under the ground is going to be carbohydrate, right? Not all the good stuff that you get in leaves. And kids will not eat leaves. So you got to get it in them in other ways, in other creative ways by which you can get it into them. So I think it's about asking what the processing does. And also wondering whether your diet is significantly only the ultra processed.
Right, of course.
Right, and also there is also categories of processing where you combine things that don't naturally exist. Like for example, a chicken nugget is basically chicken and maida of some kind.
Yes.
So it's carbohydrates and protein.
Yes.
Nowhere in nature do you find that combination. So therefore, it is again, for your body, it's hyper palatable. It's like, oh, I'm getting everything in one shot and it will never give you signal satiety. You'll end up overeating and things like that. Right? So be wary of that. It doesn't mean you'll never eat that ever, right? I think that's not a sustainable. If you deprive yourself, you'll quietly, without realizing, go and eat some snacks somewhere. That's what happens. And people who eat a lot of those sugar substitutes, stevia and all that, right? They're simply telling your gut is getting cheated every day, saying that, boss, you promised me calories in the tongue, and you cheated me in the gut. It will signal quietly, go make him more hungry next time. And people end up consuming sometimes 200-300 calories in their next meal. And without even realizing, right? You'll quietly consume the serving of potato, you'll add a little bit more.
Right.
You'll quietly just go to the fridge, take one piece of chocolate and eat. You'll quietly add one more Oreo or some cookie that you'll eat, and you will not even realize it. Yeah, so people need to be mindful about not depriving themselves of delicious food. You cannot subsist on ultra healthy, bad tasting food. That's completely unsustainable.
Right.
Yeah.
But that being said, there's something that we're actually facing internally, which we call the cooked fact or myth.
Yes.
wherein we have our own range of products and there are certain claims that we add on the packs.
Yes.
But most people don't end up believing these claims,
Yeah.
especially our moms.
Yes.
How is that something we can actually combat? These could be simple claims like no added preservatives, no
Yes.
added flavors, no
Yes.
added colors.
Yes.
But still,
Yeah.
people always have this perception that no, you could be lying.
No, it is. So it is a wider issue, right? So in India, people have a tendency to trust individuals over institutions. It's a very common issue, right? They will actually trust some random person with no credibility when they say this is good, that is bad, etc. But they will not trust an actual certification. They say, no, you paid money, you are corrupt, you're a big company,
Exactly.
etc. Right? So Indians have a mistrust of anything that is profit making, right? So there is it's a deeper, wider thing that we are only slowly now getting to the point where people don't see money making as a bad thing, and that it actually moves everyone forward, right? And from that mindset of the scarcity mindset to the abundance mindset is still, so therefore people end up mistrusting companies, but blindly trusting random people on the internet. That's one problem. The second particular problem, particularly when it comes to food, is that when people consume content on social media, all they're seeing is all the bad stuff. Right? They're seeing all those documentaries on Netflix where some American company lied to you. Right? Some company lied about non-stick some 30 years ago. Some company, some vegan documentary showed all the cruelty to animals. So people have this mindset that I cannot trust anything that companies put, right? And then people will make entire content on the basis of, look, this product had so much sugar. I said, boss, that's what the audience asked for. You think people would buy a Bonvita like product, okay, or any of those drinks like Boost or whatever it is, if it was less sweet, their kids will spit it out, and then you will not buy it. Then there's no company to sell it, right? So the problem is that, and at the same time, companies also have to compete with each other in making some of these claims, although they're not necessarily really adding any value. See, no preservatives is fine, right? But in an ideal world, the tiny amount of preservatives added make no difference. That's a different issue, right? But when you actually make a claim, people end up not believing you, right? I feel it's because I think it also has to do with educating the public about the basic day-to-day science of how packaging actually works, right? That there are ways of packaging things, and which, by the way, the research for all of that came from DRDO and military organizations that have a vested interest in keeping their soldiers healthy and alive and fed and nutritious, right? There is no other people on the planet for whom it is such a central problem, right? As much as a mother wants to keep their son alive, a country wants to keep its soldiers healthy, right?
Of course.
And so these technologies have end up going that kind of test before they make it to the consumer world, right? In general, ready-to-eat foods itself is fundamentally a DRDO military innovation that came out of all of that, and 10 years after it was used in the military is when it came into the public. Domain and so on. It's those kinds of packaging technologies like retort packaging and so on that kind of came that way. So it's just that I think people also need to parallelly be able to look at that, consume the kind of science content that tells them that, boss, this is how it's made, right? People will blindly trust that jaggery is healthier than sugar.
Yes.
Without ever asking for, I want to see how it's made. Trust me, if you see how jaggery is made, 90% of that jaggery you'll never buy. Yes, there may be 10% who are ultra organic, honest. They are fantastic jaggery makers. You know them personally, go buy those products. Fantastic, unprocessed, no doubt at all. Vast majority, that jaggery that is slightly whiter in color, how did it get white in color? It had to be bleached, right? How did it become so dry? You had to use these dihydrose powder and all of that to remove the moisture. And how is it now? Normal jaggery is actually very low pH and will curdle milk. So you had to do pH regulators and all of that. Of course, it's processed, right? But it's processed in a very unregulated small village environment and you naturally trust it, right? But you won't trust a factory where there are engineers who have to come and certify it and the government certifies it every year. That you don't trust because no company can pay a bribe.
And none of the claims that you can make actually can be made without passing certain proof, certain tests that you do.
See, that's what I think the most common myth and something that I'm yet to make a reel about is this idea that never believe claims that cannot be falsified. This is a very weird thing, right? If somebody says, this food has some life energy and if you eat it from microwave, you're killing the life energy, is a claim that I cannot design a test to prove right or wrong. Because they will
Right.
tell you, no,
Right.
this is beyond all of it. Anything that cannot be tested and proven one way or another cannot be taken seriously. So you have to really trust something that I can test for, right? And I can test for pH level, I can test for impurity level, right? FSSAI standard for sugar is 99.5% sucrose, 0.5% something else, and people worried about that 0.5% as chemical, right? But Jaggery, only 90% is sugar. All the rest is whatever you want. That people are not worried about.
Like you said, a village sounds like a more trustable source than say a factory where something is made.
And to be fair,
just the word.
Yeah, exactly. See, and to be fair, I think the food industry hasn't done itself any favors by, again, 100-year history of obviously devious marketing and huge amounts of muscle power to sell you ultra refined food. And so it hasn't done itself any favors, right? But at the same time, the problem is that people look at the 4 or 5 bad things they've done and ignore the millions of things that the overall food system has done to literally keep you alive, right? And literally, the Green Revolution people blame now. Boss, India would not have the population it has today without the Green Revolution. People would have starved to death. Right? And now people are saying that no, they hybridize the wheat and that wheat is what is causing gluten insensitivities, etc. Boss, the earlier generation of wheat, you couldn't feed even 200 million people. Right? And now we have 1.4 billion people. Right? So I think people deeper sense of mistrust in science is fine. I think scientists and the industry needs to do a lot better. They also need to be more honest. They need to be transparent. They need to not fool, etc. to win the trust. Right? But at the same time, the public, all I'm telling you is be skeptical of companies, be skeptical of the claims that some company is saying no added preservatives, all of that, right? Yes, be skeptical, but be skeptical of everything else. You're blindly believing the other side.
Absolutely.
And putting all of your mistrust only here. That I think is really where the problem is.
Yeah, so that being said, I mean, there are a lot of claims, again, like you said, which if you're being skeptical about, you should be skeptical about both the sides.
You should.
Factory or, villages or wherever you're getting your produce from.
Yes.
But that also being said, there are so many different sources of information available that you need not necessarily know where to get the right information from.
It's very hard. Yeah.
Who to believe. Yeah. And how much research to actually do before you conclude on something.
It's very hard, right? To be fair, like no one has the time and the inclination. We all have our lives to lead. And it's very hard to, on top of, navigating this world of information, to also now learn this advanced skill of trying to find out which one is more trustworthy, which one is not.
Right.
And not everyone can sit and learn the science and say, no, this is, etc., etc. My feeling is that, and one of the things I've been trying to do on my channel is to, beyond just pointing out something as misinformation, like the parable about teaching someone to fish as opposed to, simply giving them fish, is to also give them some mental heuristics and tricks in spotting bullshit and BS and spotting BS and these kinds of things, right? And some of those things are very simple things, right? Somebody says this is toxic. Ask for what the toxin is, right? If somebody says this will cause arthritis, ask for the clinical study. There's a reason why modern medicine has advanced to the point where we are now able to do heart transplants, right? And as much as you glorify whatever happened 2,000 years ago, we were not doing heart transplants, right?
Yes.
Right. We were not doing C-sections and saving millions of women from complicated births and so on. So, and we did not have things like birth control. We did not have things like hybridized versions of these vegetables and so on. So, I think you just need to ask the next question. So, ask for, if people say this causes cancer, etc. So, show me the study. Is it a rat study or is it a human study? And what is the strength of the correlation and so on, right? So, what I often find is that simply asking the next level question, and the moment the other side says, no, this is according to Ayurveda, according to Unani, according to some traditional Chinese medicine, then you know that, boss, that then the person is not really serious about evidence. So I would just simply say that it is okay to be dumb and ask dumb questions. And if the person is not able to answer you, right, or give you a process by which you can get to that answer, then be skeptical of that information. Always ask where that information came from, how did you, right? And part of the problem also is that the mainstream media doesn't help, right? I mean, today, so the job is that there are influencers putting out misinformation.
Right.
And the mainstream media isn't fact-checking the influencers. They're just simply blindly reporting it, right? Because for them, it's content, right? They know that, oh, this is going to get me views. They're not actually fact-checking, or they're saying that, no, let me get a doctor to say, why is this wrong? Why is this particular claim wrong? They're not doing that because nobody has the money. Modern day digital business models don't work. So be skeptical of all media sources. And remember that anything, one of the heuristics that I give my mother is actually quite straightforward. She will say, is this true? I read something like this. And I'll ask her the first question I've been asking for the last 10 years. Where did you read this? He says, if it's Facebook or WhatsApp or Instagram, assume it's wrong and then go from there. Now find ways to see whether it could be right or not. But first assume it's wrong. I've literally gone to that level now, saying that that's now easy, right?
Because the university of WhatsApp is now universal.
Exactly, right? So that there is no cost of publishing anything on WhatsApp. But to publish a scientific study takes life and effort and data and experiments and hundreds of people wanting to prove you wrong. That is how something gets published. And that's why it is very, very hard. Right?
Also, asking a question to someone is one level of things.
Yeah.
But what most people anyway end up doing is going to Google and looking for a result for their problem, which most often gives them the answer of cancer.
Yes.
So then there's immediate fear that kind of sets in, and then you start believing anything that you see.
See, I think I'm from the generation of Indians who grew up. I got internet access only when I was 16 years old. Okay. So I'm sort of the transition generation. The current generation has grown up entirely with the internet.
Right.
And my parents' generation, they still don't quite get how the internet works. They use it, etc., etc. But the way they see the internet, their mental model is based on the older world when internet didn't exist. Right. So to give you a sense, when I was growing up, there was only one Doordarshan, and you got news for 20 minutes a day, and it was there in the morning and evening. There was nothing in between, right? It was that is what the media landscape was. Your only way of getting information was that. Either that or you read the newspaper every day, which again is very limited. There was only so much space, only a few things you could print, right? They grew up in a world where they assume that information printed in a newspaper and that came on TV, given that these are very scarce environments, it has to be true. So people grew up trusting these institutions.
Right.
Now, they bring that forward. And so my mother's viewpoint is, how can it be fake if it came on Facebook?
Right.
And we think we feel like laughing at it, but no. That is just how millions of Indians think. It is that surely if it's published, it must be true, right? And so first and foremost, I think getting the public to realize that, no, you know what? Now anybody can publish anything.
Right.
It has not been verified. Nobody has checked it. There is no editor who rejects 1,000 stories and says this is important and only post that.
Except for the language, maybe.
Right. So therefore, what is happening is that people have to recognize that in a world of abundance, all your information could have been concocted out of thin air. And now, by the way, because of AI and ChatGPT, there's going to be so much content that people are going to churn out by asking ChatGPT for something and just blindly posting that. Right. And now you have to remember that 10 years ago, Google essentially focused on solving this problem by saying that, you know what, I'm going to build an algorithm that really looks at the quality and the reliability of the person linking to something, so that I know that this is more reliable. And so they built this thing saying that, okay, fine, if the Hindu or the New York Times or a particular newspaper, the Times of London or whatever it is linking to a story, then that is more trustable than a WordPress blog or a blog post blog. So they at least built that algorithm. The problem is that as now content moved out of those things into the social media world, and with these major newspapers now blindly reporting social media content as if it is news, the entire algorithm is broken. Which is why actually now when you Google for something, very, very unreliable. You can only see the most extreme takes as opposed to the curated, sensible take on any subject, right? And because of the negativity bias, you will only see to use the other metaphor, you will only see the story about the man biting dog.
Right.
Not the story about the fact that in most situations, neither dogs or men bite each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. It's like sort of like how it is not news to say that there were no murders in Chennai. It's not a news item. Right. A sensational murder happened is news. Yeah. And for the next 2 weeks, you're going to see that same clip looped over and over again in WhatsApp, in everything. And it creates this illusion that it's happening all over. It's really not. In general, overall crime is going down everywhere. But your social media amplifies the trivial and makes it seem like it's most
And
important.
also brings back a lot of the past, right? Especially when there's a natural
No
calamity.
context, yes, right.
You see that there are a lot of old clips that are recirculated
Yeah,
again.
they will recirculate some clip from some other country and say, oh, look, this is happening. And so everybody can find whatever media they want to tell whatever story they want. And there is no form of way to watermark and really verify that. And so fact checkers, as I said, Brandolini's law, you can have any number of fact checkers. You need 1,000 times more fact checkers than creators, then that's never going to happen. Right? So I think in general, I would say that be skeptical of all information that you see. But at the same time, I know it's very hard to be forever skeptical of everything. It's very stressful as well, right? It's okay to be dumb and ask some very basic questions, right? Find out how that information was sourced, right? I mean, find out whether or not there is potentially any conflicts of interest, whether or not somebody has a vested interest in saying one story versus the other, whether or not there is any kind of scientific experimental data to back it up, whether there are more detailed questions that it is able to answer. And that is how I think people build this muscle. And it is, to be honest, it is not easy. And I really think, for at least younger children, I think they need to pick these skills up in school itself now. It's not about, right? Their bigger skill is not going to be able to learn to do something, because I think AI and other things will help them do whatever they need to do. Their biggest skill is going to be able to tell from BS versus non-BS. And that I think is a hard muscle to build.
So Krish, on your page, Masalalab on social media, you're doing a great job of breaking all this fear-mongering that a lot of people are doing.
Yeah.
So what can pages like Cooked that have, say, a 3 million following on social media actually do to support your movement and give the right information about food to the masses that are watching our videos?
I think a big part of there's an asymmetry between people scaring and people reassuring or debunking that scaring and saying you don't need to be scared of that. Right? There's a huge asymmetry. Right? And pages such as yours are actually sort of in the middle, because you're in the job of actually creating food. Food is something that's supposed to give people joy. You know, you're focused on that, right? You are so far. Pages such as yours have not really gotten into. It's good that you guys have, for example, I've collaborated with you guys on some of these reels to debunk, because I'm sure people keep leaving the same comments. They're afraid of the same things. They see something in your cooking video.
Absolutely,
and they say,
there are a lot of ingredients that they want to
nitpick and all that. And so you felt this need. I really think that pages such as yours need to have a very dedicated science communication team, right? Whose job it is to intersperse your usual style of communication and whatever it is you do while you are perhaps maybe even talking about a specific dish, right? And you really want, and in the natural, this thing say, I'm going to focus on the dish, right? But it might be good to infuse while you're making the dish, address some of the most common misconceptions that you know are going to come. You know, when you're cooking something on a non-stick, somebody's going to say some stupid thing about that. And you preempt that by absolutely maybe saying that, hey, by the way, for all practical purposes, non-stick is safe to use. That a tiny amount of MSG is not going to kill you.
On Chinese videos, on any Chinese recipes or Indo-Chinese recipes.
So you might as well preempt that, and in your stories, either link to somebody else's video, my video, to a paper, to a citation. So in general, I think on the longer run, larger pages such as yours, is good to have a science communication team whose job, so one is to say, you're going to make 10 pieces of content on food, and then you're going to have one thing that is about debunking, maybe the most common thing. That's just good. You need to do that. But I think the more pervasive one is to make all cooking content. Remember that on the other side, there are people who put recipe, dishes, etc. And while they're cooking that, spread misinformation.
Absolutely.
They'll say that I am cooking this dal on the open page. If you cook on pressure cooker, it destroys nutrients. So they are spreading that. So you guys need to do the exact same thing. Spread scientific information while you're actually communicating the culinary part of it, without overdoing it, of course. Right? You don't want to bore the guy with a lot of science.
Yes.
But at least the most important things, right? And let your science communication team figure out where to plug in these elements in the most common pervasive areas, right? Particularly when it comes to pressure cooker and microwave and the common things, like just offhand saying that when you're using a jaggery or white sugar, by the way, just FYI, all forms of sugar are the same, is a sentence worth saying, right? Because your videos get millions of views, right? And people keep hearing that again and again. It's all about repetition, right? Right. You have to remember that the other side is repeating that same nonsense millions of times. You guys need to repeat it. That is what I would actually say. I've spoken to a bunch of other larger YouTube channels. I keep telling them, sneak this information into your core videos. right? You have a feeling that somehow it's not core and it'll take your audience away. Boss, no. On the longer run, you're going to end up, that side is winning because that side is cramming in this misinformation into the way they create content. And you've got to be able to debunk that. You cannot expect somebody else to do it for you.
This definitely makes sense because every single video that we make, especially if it is in the Indo-Chinese range or if it's anything to do with baking,
Yes.
there's always a common question. If we use maida, can we use atta?
Maida,
if we use sugar, can we use jaggery?
Yes, yes.
Can it be made without MSG? These
I mean,
are very common
yes,
things.
many times people would ask me, I would say, you can absolutely use atta if you want to make a terrible bread. Terrible tasting, atrocious cardboardy bread. You won't even rise. Go and make it with 100% atta. Go do it, right? And people sometimes also forget there are various grades of atta, right? Based on the way it's processed. It's interesting how I think in India there is a preference for very high fiber, fully ground whole wheat kind of atta in some parts of North India. South Indians don't like it. So the atta sold in South India actually is significantly lower on fiber and so on, right? And so in that sense, people completely fool themselves. So for the most part, like even when it comes to millets, very common this thing. Millets are fantastic because they're sustainable. They can grow in like low water conditions, and we must absolutely eat way more millets than we are right now as part of our diet, right? But then people will also say that when they want to take nutritional information, they'll take ragi's nutritional information. But they'll consume tinai and samai and all of that. That's about as bad as rice from a nutrition standpoint, right? It's a grain at the end of the day. It's the same family. It's the same grass, same cereal grain, same carbohydrates, same effect on your blood sugar. Of course, it may be more sustainable and therefore you should absolutely eat it. But let's not, BS ourselves about the health and all of that, right? Because you'll use ragi's nutritional information, but never consume ragi as much, right? Because that's hard. That's not very tasty. You will end up consuming all of these other things. So I think people end up fooling themselves, right? So it's important to regularly remind them of some of these very common things. Every time you show a microwave, say microwave is the safest way to eat food. Every time you use maida, saying that moderate amounts of this is fine. Make sure that you're eating it in moderation, that you're combining it with vegetables, telling them, saying that every time you use a sweetener, that all sweeteners are effectively the same, and things like that, right?
But that being said, obviously we're not going to give it like a disclaimer in a movie every time a cigarette or an alcohol bottle pops up.
Yeah, but no, I think you actually have to have the person speak it, right? I honestly actually believe if I was a social media consultant, it'll give you more engagement because it will make some people angry, and that in turn, always remember, the angry people are a small minority because they end up having the courage to sit and come and comment. The vast majority, you can change their mind, right? So never be afraid to state facts.
And with that, we wrap up today's session. Krish, thank you so much for coming over, educating us a little more about all these silly myths that are available across the internet.
Yes.
And also making us more aware about the kind of food that we eat. Yeah. Hope to have you back soon.
Love to.
And in the DMs and comments, you guys can always comment on what you want us to talk about in the next episode. And see you soon.